So I'm here today to talk about writing your college level paper. And I subtitled it, Say Goodbye to the 5-Paragraph Essay, because this is what most of you are used to doing, which is that 1 paragraph for the introduction, 3 for the body, 1 for the conclusion, right? Sound familiar? Kind of? Yeah. Okay, so this is not going to work at college. If you have a 10-page paper in my literature course, I had a student who insisted on writing 3 paragraphs for the body. She failed, right? Doesn't make any sense. So you have to get out of the mindset of the 5-paragraph essay, and we have to move on to what college level essays are looking to do. When you are in high school, your teachers are desperately trying to get you to remember things. You need facts and figures. So think of yourselves in high school as you're kind of like a series of glasses. And every day the teacher comes in and pours something into you. And every 3-4 weeks she tips you over to see if what comes out is what she put in. Right? And that's where the 5-paragraph essay comes in. Can you tell her what she told you? We as college professors are looking for more than that. We're looking to see if you have sort of internalized the material that you've read, have thought about it, and have come to your own conclusion about it. Right? So we know what we said. We know what we think. We want to know what you think. So what that requires is both analysis and synthesis. Now, analysis is telling me, say, what an author said and how he said it. This author uses the metaphor of walking to indicate female agency. That's the analysis. The synthesis is when you tell me what you think it means. Not just, okay, Marilyn Hacker uses walking in her poetry, but now you have to tell me why you think she does that. And that's the synthesis part. The difficult thing is that we don't want you to just analyze and synthesize the things that we teach you in class. We also want you to analyze and synthesize outside research into the essay's topic. So you have to be able to not only tell me what you think about what we discussed in class, but you have to be able to tell me what you think and what you believe about the material you researched on the topic. This is a lot more difficult. It scares the heck out of freshmen because you're used to getting a lot of guidance. You're used to having a teacher say, okay, I want you to take the scarlet letter and write about what Hester Prynne's red A means and why she named her daughter Pearl. If you take my class, I'll say, hey, write me a 10-page paper on the scarlet letter. Fly, little bird, good luck, right? I'm not going to give you any more than that. Because of that analysis and synthesis part. I want you to come up with the themes and the ideas. Well, this is scary, right? So when I talk to my freshmen about this, a lot of them come to me and literally say, now what do I do? And what we talk about in literature and English is what we call scaffolding the assignment. What is a scaffold? You know what a scaffold is. We see them all the time. What's a scaffold? I'm sorry? No, but literally a scaffold. When you're walking down the street and you come around the corner and you say, oh, the scaffolding's up in front of my building. What is it? I know you know this. The pipes with the blue stuff on the top, okay, and they use it to climb up. So you put one thing of scaffolding, you climb to the top of that one, and then you put another piece of scaffolding, and you climb to the top, and pretty soon you're at the top of the building, right? Well, you do the same thing with writing assignments. You scaffold the assignment. That means that you have a number of different stages that you're going to use. The first stage we call pre-writing, right? This is how you decide on your topic. Everybody does this differently, right? We use the term before writing, not necessarily writing. Each of you knows, or should learn within the next few months, how you think best. Some people read to learn, some people write to learn, some people talk to learn, some people do a combination of all things. So the first thing you do is decide on your topic. Well, if I give you that broad topic, just write to me about something, about the scarlet letter, you have to sit down and decide what it is you want to write about. So all those things that you did in high school, brainstorming, those word webs where you put one word in the middle and then you start building on those words. Do whatever it is that helps you think. You can free write, which is just sitting down, setting a timer for 5 minutes and writing whatever comes into your head, no matter how silly. And then you go back and you look. You'd be surprised, your brain, if you're just writing like, I'm not sure what to type, after about a minute, your brain gets tired and sends you an idea. Hello, how about the scarlet letter as a metaphor? Yay. Okay, start writing. So you're determining what you're trying to prove about your topic. These things you can do together. You don't have to sit down and systematically do each one of these steps. Sometimes they all come together as you're brainstorming. Not only do you come up with your topic, but you come up with what you want to prove. You don't want to formulate it too tightly during this first stage. You want to leave it loose. You want to let your mind flow. You want to let your ideas find you. Right? Sometimes if you try to chase an idea, it's like kicking a marble across the linoleum floor. You'll lose it. You'll never get it back. So let your mind flow. I know some students who draw, actually, as opposed to write. If you can draw an idea, picture of Hester Prydden with a scarlet letter on her, whatever works. Eventually, you want to get to what you're trying to prove and how you're going to prove it. And this is what starts working into your thesis. Right? If you can do this at this pre-writing stage, you want to start outlining basic ideas you have. Ooh, scarlet letter is a metaphor. What is it a metaphor for? Why scarlet? Why a letter? Whatever you can come up with. So this pre-writing is where you get all your ideas sort of on the page where you can look at them. It's supposed to be a mess. This is not supposed to be a nice, orderly little outline, but just to get your ideas on paper. Eventually, your pre-writing ends when you can come up with a thesis statement. Now, I'm using thesis statement a little differently than your high school teachers used a thesis statement. Generally, they mean one sentence, right? At the end of your first paragraph, you put the one sentence about what you're going to prove in the essay. But for college, you need a more nuanced and deep thesis than just, I'm going to prove that the scarlet letter is a metaphor. So you have to think about what it is you want to prove. And you do start out with this sentence. In this essay, I will prove blank. If you cannot fill in that blank, you have a topic, not a thesis. We're going to talk about the difference. But just keep in mind a topic's very broad and a thesis is very focused. The thesis is what you want to prove. It's going to be what your whole argument is based on, what your whole paper is based on. So it's very important that you be very clear in your head what you want to prove. If you don't know, at least by the middle of writing your paper, exactly what you're trying to prove, your paper's just going to be a mess. So keep in mind your thesis could change as you write. You might get more nuanced, might get a new idea, but you have to have something going into the paper to have it clear. And then you formulate your thesis statement, which should be about a paragraph. In this paper, I'm going to prove this. I'm going to use this text to talk about it, and this is why I'm going to try to prove it. Once you've got that in your head, you can then start writing your paper. But as you're writing, you should also be doing research. It is not generally a good idea to just do all your research first, consider it done, and then move on to writing the paper. Two reasons. One is, as you write the paper, you're going to need more stuff, so you're going to have to go back to the library. But the other reason is, it's a really good way to procrastinate. I did it with my dissertation. Can't possibly write that chapter. I need 6 more books. Library, have a cup of coffee, talk to my friends, go around, read a couple journal articles. Then I'd go, can't write today, it's too late. Don't let your research get in the way of your writing. Do it in tandem. Some people, though, like to go and do a whole day research, get a lot of stuff before they start writing. Some people like to start writing and then do research. Again, I'm not giving you this prescribed formula. Everyone must do it in these steps. But you have to figure out how it works best for you. So when you're doing your research, first of all, you want to list your search terms. You want to think what exactly it is that you want to look up. Do I need to look up what a metaphor is? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Do I need to look up what metaphors are in the Scarlet Letter? What scholars say about this? Yeah, you probably should. So metaphors in Scarlet Letter. If you're looking at it from a feminist perspective, feminist scholarship on Scarlet Letter. Focus your research down in. You need to determine which resources you need to explore, and there are 3 different kinds. Primary sources. Does anyone know what a primary source is? Ring a bell? What is it? I'm sorry? It's the first-hand, it's the thing that you're studying. It's the actual book. It's the actual poem. It's the film that you're looking at. That's your primary source. Your secondary source is books. Well, they're books, they're articles written about the primary source directly. So generally, for college-level papers, they're written by academics. You would go to the library, you'd pick out a book, collection of essays, or a book about the Scarlet Letter. You would go and look up journal articles written by academics in academic journals. And all of those are perfectly legitimate sources for your papers. Problem is, there are these things that exist called tertiary sources. Don't use tertiary sources. These are encyclopedias, dictionaries, for the love of God. Do not start your paper with Webster's dictionary describes scarlet as X. We're not in junior high, right? Tertiary sources write about like secondary sources rather than the primary sources, right? They kind of like, or they give just definitions, broad definitions, but they're not academic. So they don't belong in an academic paper. You can go to them to like get ideas. Search terms, dictionaries are good for search terms, but you never ever quote a dictionary or encyclopedia in your college level paper. Some of you are like, oh my God, I can't. No, you can't. And for the love of all that is holy, you may never ever use Wikipedia. Ever. People can go on and change it. I can go on and say, I am the Queen of Sheba. And until somebody goes, no, she's not, it's out there for anybody to say, oh, Queen of Sheba, Dr. Wendy Galgan. I didn't know that. So you have to make sure that the sources you use are legitimate. You can use web sources. You have to be careful. You're going to do another workshop on how to do those. But just keep in mind that it's just primary and secondary sources that belong in your papers. So what I really need to talk to you a lot about today is organizing your essay. This is where we wanted to make sure you knew the process by which you do this. Because again, this is very different than that 5-paragraph essay. Yet it has some similarities. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that keyhole structure for a 5-paragraph essay. I know high school teachers use it a lot. Okay. You have your topic. Your topic is very broad. And your introduction serves to narrow down your topic to your thesis. Now notice I didn't put the thesis here, I put it kind of down here because in academic papers, you may have to do a little bit of an introduction before you even get to your thesis. And I'll talk about why in a minute. But you have your topic, your introduction, the body of your paper, and then the rest of these got messed up. Your conclusion goes up in here, right? So the body is where you make your argument and the conclusion is the end. These arrows, you see, they point from one to the other and back around. What you want to make sure is you come full circle in your essay, that you don't leave your reader hanging at the end. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute, but I want you to keep that idea in mind that an essay is a circle. It's an argument. It's not a circular argument. That's something different. But it's an argument that completes a circle. Start somewhere, you move through your argument, you go back to where you started and say that you've proved it. Okay. So your first draft is where you sit down and you just write. It should be messy. You should not be worried about getting the syntax and the grammar and the structure right. You got to get everything but the kitchen sink in that first draft so that you can see what it is you think about the topic. You're writing to learn at this stage. Start with the body of your essay. Do not write the introduction. Do not, some people write the conclusion first. Do not do that. You don't know what you're going to say until you say it. So start with the body of your essay. This is the argument. This is where you lay out the argument you're making in support of your thesis. Not an argument like, I hate you too, slam the door and run out. But an argument, a reasoned argument. It's like you're a lawyer making a case. Think about it that way. You're arguing a case in front of your professor. And you have to make sure that, as the old saying goes, all your ducks are in a row. That it's clear to your professor what your thesis is, what your argument is, and how you're proving your thesis. Students get really in trouble when they lose sight of what they're trying to prove. I've had a number of essays where I had a student start out to prove something, and by the time she got to the end, she had disproved what she wanted to prove in the beginning. Fortunately, she never went back and changed the beginning, so she fails the essay. Make sure that your argument is clear and in your head the whole time you are writing the essay. The main thing to keep in mind is what you need in the body of the essay is claims, and what you need supporting those claims is evidence. Claims and evidence. A claim is a point you make in support of your argument. I believe that global climate change has affected the climate in New York City. Right? Now, there's nothing scientific in there. There's no fact in there. I'm saying I believe. It is where your reader will think I agree or I disagree. It's a little more than opinion, but you could think of it as opinion. When you are giving your opinion, when you are making a claim in support of your argument, your reader's going to say, oh, I think I agree with that, or I think I disagree with it. Your essay is a series of claims. You make your thesis statement, then you make one claim in support of that thesis statement, you make another claim in support of that thesis statement. So it's very important that after you do your first draft, you go through and you underline each claim you make. And look at it and say, does this really support what I was saying? Or is it off topic? You've all seen that dreaded off topic on your papers, right? On off topic. This is where you go off topic, when your claim doesn't support your argument. So once you get your claims, once you've decided what you want to say, some people like to do them in an outline. These are the claims I'm going to make, if that works for you. You need to provide evidence for each claim you make. You cannot just say global warming affected the climate in New York City. You have to prove it. You have to say in support, I'm making this up, but over the past 2 centuries, for every half degree, the temperature went up globally. The rainfall in New York dropped by ½ inch, whatever. And whatever you present as evidence, the reader has to be able to say, I know that is true or I know that is false. Factual. That's evidence. That's the other reason you go through and underline your claims. Every claim has to be supported by evidence. A claim that is not supported by evidence is nothing more than opinion. So you have to make sure. So after you go through and make sure your claims all support your thesis, then you go through and you say, does each of these claims have some sort of evidence? Now, there are all kinds of different evidence that you can use. You could use quotations from those primary sources. Marilyn Hacker uses walking in her poem to indicate a woman has agency, the ability to control her own life. And this is supported when Hacker writes, quote, I walk, wherever I land, I resurrect my morning walk, unquote. Evidence is the quotation directly taken from the poem. Of course, you can use quotations or ideas from secondary sources. They can be used as evidence as well. I say that this proves agency, and hey, Joe Bag of Donuts, who wrote this journal article, says so too. Quote him here. That can be evidence. Also, I don't like the word stories, but stories from experience. There are occasions when you can not so much a literature paper, but like a history paper or something like that, where you might use your own experience. I grew up in this part of Brooklyn, and from the time I was a child to here, the ethnic makeup of the neighborhood has changed from Italian to Irish. That's something factual that you know that you can put in there. I would be careful with those, that you're not going off into opinion. I kind of think it's changed, but I don't really know. It doesn't help. It's not evidence, it's opinion. But each one of your claims needs to be supported by at least one of these types of evidence. After you do this, after you get all your ideas down, you do your second draft. And it is important to understand that when you do your second draft, you're not just revising, you're rewriting. It's very hard when you get something written down on a page. It seems permanent, doesn't it? You've written it down, that's it, I'm done. And this is where students also get into trouble because they don't think I might need to change this. You might go and get to the end of your paper and say, wow, I didn't really prove my argument, did I? I better go back. And that means rewriting, adding things, changing things, taking things out, making sure that the order of your argument makes sense. So revising is kind of looking through and seeing if your ideas work. Oh, maybe I need to add something here. Rewriting is actually the physical act of taking the paper. You can tear it apart. It's much easier on computer now. You can start a couple files, move paragraphs around, and actually rewrite the paper so that it makes more sense. The third draft, and only on the third draft, is when you should add your introduction and conclusion, because now you know what you're going to say. Now you're sure. You've gotten to the point where your argument's laid out pretty well. You've got all your claims and evidence. You're still not worrying about grammar or syntax or punctuation or proofreading. You still should be focused only on your argument, on the essay that you are writing, and making sure that you're proving it. In your introduction, you need to do three things. You have to introduce the topic. This paper will be about metaphors in Scarlet Letter. You need to define your terms. Again, not the way Webster's dictionary does. You may be able to define the terms yourself. If you take that literature class with me and you want to write about female agency, the ability to control your own life, you would start out by saying, I want to write about female agency in poems. The idea of agency means that a human being has control of his or her life. You've defined it off the top of your head. You don't have to use an expert. If you're not sure that that's a good enough definition, you need to go to one of your secondary sources, not Wikipedia, not an encyclopedia, but a book or a journal article that talks about agency, and say, as Professor so-and-so says, agency is. This does not mean you have to nitpick and define every little thing that you're talking about, but you do have to make sure that the major topic of your paper is understood by the reader. Then you need to make your thesis clear. Some papers, it's as easy as putting in a sentence at the end, in this essay, I will prove that. Sometimes you might need 3 or 4 sentences to explain what it is you want to prove in detail. You want to make it very easy for your professor to have in her mind exactly what it is that you're talking about as she's reading the paper. If your thesis is muddled, she won't know what you're trying to prove, and your grade will be lower. Because basically the rule of thumb is don't piss off your professor. If I get a paper and the thesis isn't clear, I'm already pissed off before I even read it. And then I get more angry as I read it, going, why is this person wasting my time? She didn't know what she was thinking about. I'm not going to give you a break on the grade. You're going to not get a very good grade. So make it clear for your professor to be able to understand what you're talking about. In your conclusion, you need to sum up what is really important, and where students make huge mistakes is you may not ever introduce new ideas or new evidence into the conclusion. So sometimes we'll read a paper and you'll go through the whole paper, and then right at the end in the conclusion it will say, oh, and by the way, there's also this other idea in the Scarlet Letter. That cannot go there. If it is not in your argument, it cannot be in your conclusion. It does not belong there. As a side note to what does not belong there, God is everywhere, God does not belong in the conclusion of your paper. Every semester, I get 1 or 2 students who in the conclusion of the paper say, therefore, if we read this book, Dr. Galgan, you and I will be saved through the blood of the Lamb. Now, unless you're writing a religious studies paper, God does not belong in the paper. So you also have to make sure that it doesn't talk about global importance of this particular poem, right? Poetry has global importance. Maybe this particular poem doesn't. So you can't say, this poem will save the world if only everybody would read it. No, that's not a conclusion to an academic paper. You have to sum up the argument that you were making, make sure that you say, this is what I set out to prove and this is how I proved it. And you have to keep in mind that your reader has one question, which is, so what? Why did this student write this paper? And you say, I wrote this paper to prove that the scarlet letter, the A that Esther Prynne wears, is a metaphor for X. And I did. Give me an A, basically. But you have to make sure that you sum it up clearly and concisely. For your 4th draft, I know, you're like, 4 drafts? Sometimes you'll have done 6 or 7 by the time you get to this stage, if you're doing it right. You need to find an outside reader or readers. By that I mean someone not in the class that you are taking. My dad taught high school chemistry and physics. My mom was an English teacher. I would send my mom my dissertation, but my reader was my dad. My dad would say, excuse me, always have an outside reader read for the factor. If my dad took my chapter, and he got halfway through and went, what are you saying? I don't get it. I knew I hadn't done my job. I was not making my argument clear enough to have someone who wasn't in the course or didn't know about women's poetry understand what I was saying. So what you want to do is ask your reader to read for parts that he or she doesn't understand, and also to read for parts that kind of make a leap. Remember, all you're doing really, kind of, I shouldn't say all, but you're telling a story, right? This, and then this, and this is, it's a narratology. You're trying to tell a story of what you're trying to prove. And if any of you know little kids, if you have little kids in your life, if you tell a kid a story and you say, well, okay, and the little bunny was in the garden, and then the little Barney was, eating carrots, and then you say, now the bunny was up in the tree, and the kid goes, whoa, 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 how'd the bunny get up the tree? Forget it. You got to tell your reader how the bunny got up the tree. You've got to make sure that each step of your argument leads to the next one. And that's where your reader comes in. Your reader should mark where it is that he doesn't understand how you got from one point to another. Those logical missteps, those gaps in the argument are what's going to make your grade lower in your paper. Well, yes, she had a good point here, but then she moved on to something else, and I don't see how one connects to the other. You have to make sure it's very clear. You have to make sure that your professor can walk through it step by step. This is even more important when you're applying for graduate school. If they start reading your writing sample and it's got these gaps or these leaps in it, you'll go into the reject pile. They don't have any patience. They read thousands of papers. They'll get partway through and go, no, I'm not even going to bother to read the rest of this. So you make sure everything's clear and concise. Make it easy for your reader. Only in the 5th draft, the final draft, when you're finally ready, when your readers have said, okay, this is where you proofread. It doesn't make any sense to proofread before that because you're changing things. If your reader comes to you and says this whole 2nd page doesn't make sense, you have to rewrite it. Why proofread it before? So you're proofreading for both grammar, those are the rules, and syntax, right? That's how you say things. You can have a perfectly grammatical sentence that makes no sense whatsoever because the words are in a funny order or something's off. This is where you also check to make sure that you've used words properly. It is very easy. The word peruse, for example, means to read carefully. 9 out of 10 people use it to mean I just scanned it quickly. That's incorrect. If you have that in your paper, it's wrong. So make sure you understand the words that you use. I don't mean you can't use big words. Just make sure you're crystal clear on what the words mean. You guys have a pretty good vocabulary. I mean, I don't know you particularly, but my freshman honors have pretty good vocabulary. So you have a lot to work with. But the problem is we get complacent about what things mean, and we think it means one thing, and it turns out to mean another thing. That can be very dangerous in your conclusion, particularly, because if you get the wrong word, or God forbid you leave out the word not, this proves that something is not so, and if you say this proves that something is so instead, you've just negated your whole entire paper through that error. So you have to proofread very, very carefully. Read it out loud. You have to read it out loud. Your brain will stumble. Even if you don't see the mistake, your brain will. So as you're reading along, if your tongue gets twisted in some point, stop and look and see why. Because you know what you meant to say. You kind of get it, but your brain is like processing the syntax sort of like behind. It's like part of a processor. You know, the CPU on the computer is doing one thing, but in the background something else is running. So your brain is kind of running even as you're reading, and it's telling you to stop and wait a minute. You've got a problem. Sounds weird, but kids who are in 4th grade are really, really good proofreaders because they've just learned all those language rules, and they like to help. So if you like know a 9 or 10-year-old, have him look at it, and I guarantee he'll find something. Because how long has it been since you've had grammar rules, really? About 4th grade. So have someone look at it. I'm not saying have somebody write it for you. I'm saying have somebody look at it. You have to proofread on the page. Recent studies have shown, well, a couple of years ago now, that students who proofread on the screen catch about 50% of their errors. If you print it out and proofread on the page, you catch between 85 and 90%. That's the difference between a C and a B+. It's a particularly important things like graduate school applications. After you do all that, high stakes, really high stakes stuff like job applications, proofread it backwards. Because then you're focusing on the spelling of each word. Because if you apply to graduate school and you have a misspelled word, you're in trouble. Because when we read, we don't read each word, right? We kind of scan ahead and we kind of know what it's going to say and we fill in the blanks. By proofreading backwards, we're sure to catch all those errors. A pain in the butt. But it makes all the difference in the world. You'd be surprised how many errors. Okay, so what we want to emphasize here then is that this is not the 5-paragraph essay that you are used to doing. You're all good students. I know you can sit down the night before and write a page or two and get away with it. Those of us who are like smarter than the average bear and who write pretty well, and particularly whose teachers know us, would say, oh, I know that she knows that. She just kind of left it out, right? It's not the way it happens in college. And that kind of quick, again, we're not naive enough to think that you don't write papers overnight. But those big high-stakes papers, those 10-page papers that you do at the end of the semester, have to be scaffolded in a way that allows you to check and recheck. We're not just looking for typos. We're not just looking for is the syntax right, but we're looking at the ideas. And that's where the argument part comes in. That's why you have to be extremely clear on each point that you're making, why you're making that point, and how you're supporting that point with evidence. If you do that, then your paper will be clear and understandable. Well, you could write it, but keep in mind you have to go back and look at it again, right? So you write it to, that's a good question. You know, she can't start without an introduction. You could start it that way, but then kind of set it aside, keep writing, and then go back to it. Because a lot of times I can tell when I look at the papers, a student will have written the introduction, gone on to write the paper, changed what she was doing, and never looked back. So she'll say in the introduction she's trying to prove one thing, and then by the time I get halfway through the paper, she's trying to prove something different. So whatever works for you in terms, you could even consider that part of the pre-writing.